Well, happy Thursday here. A special episode today coming in, kind of enjoying these midweek pregame shows. XFL is a little sketchy right now with the regular news. Have another good one today. Crazy week. I have my Edmonton Elks hat on here. I think it was the football team when I bought this hat, but we have Jason standing by, and I assume Dave will be joining here momentarily. Dave Naylor, our special guest today. Jason, how are you doing?
I'm doing good, Reed. I'm going to be attending 2 of these games this weekend, so I'm excited for this week.
Well, good. I'm glad. I'll do my best. I'm off this weekend, so do my best catching up on that. Mariners are on the road, so should have a fair time with that. This is a crazy week, and I want to get Dave's thoughts on all of this with the Edmonton and the Victor Quiz of it all. Really, since we've covered this, I think this is one of the strangest stories I've ever seen. What's kind of your initial thoughts? Victor party ways. Farhan had the report come out early this week.
Yeah, so my initial thoughts were, shocked like everybody else. I thought that on the surface, Quee was great for the league. I think that some of the ideas that he brought to the table were very fresh. But at the end of the day, you never know what's going on behind the scenes. And at the end of the day, it's unfortunate that it came to this.
Yeah, I have, obviously been kind of on the Edmonton bandwagon here the last couple of years. Initially going with them, and then they besmirched the XFL, and so we decided to go with America's team, the BC Lions. But to me, Victor came in with like a shot out of a cannon. Came in, I have all these ideas. We're doing this stuff. We're tweeting. We're engaging with the fans. We're hopping on podcasts. Did my podcast? Did Elks Herd or whatever? The Turf District, all these different ones, and then really in the last year, it feels like there's been this major fall off, at least in my opinion. When I had Victor on this year, seemed like, I don't know if it was more reserved, more quiet, if that was the case. I don't know. Seemed to be a fall off this year compared to last year. And I see Dave getting logging in here, so we'll get him on. But have you noticed that kind of a fall off here, Jason?
Yeah, it doesn't help that the team hasn't won a game this year. Obviously, you have to have both things working in synergy there. But I think one thing that probably played a role, and I don't hear enough people talking about it from a business perspective, is those guaranteed win tickets. Just imagine how much money they're losing just based on that, and the fact that they haven't won a home game still to this point in the season.
Well, let's bring on Dave here. I think Dave looks like hopefully he's passengering and not driving here. Dave, how are you doing here?
Dave, my vehicle is moving. I can hear you. Yeah. Can you guys hear me?
Yeah.
We can. Dave, how are you doing today?
We may have some funny reception here.
Dave, are
we all right?
Here on? Yeah. How are you doing today, sir?
Well, we got some funny reception going on. See.
Let's see if maybe Dave can log back on, can log in here, try to plan this together and figure it out. I don't know. To me, it was just kind of came out of the blue, not expecting it. What do you mean with the guaranteed win tickets? Like that wasn't on the board with everyone else?
Well, I think they expected by this point of the season that they had already broken that losing streak. And I think that, at this rate, they're going to give out a whole season's worth of season tickets for just paying for one game for the people that bought those guaranteed wins tickets. So I think at the end of the day, that probably played a bit of a factor from a business perspective. And there's been reports about maybe some kind of toxic culture within the organization as well under Quee. So, probably a lot of things went into this.
All right, let's try Dave one more time here. Dave, can you hear us?
Yeah, I can hear it pretty well. Yeah, let's hope the line will stay clear.
So, Dave, I got my Edmonton hat on here. What the heck is going on?
Well, in Edmonton overall, this all started when they walked themselves into salary cap coach's hell by firing both Brock Sunderland and Jamie Elizondo with 2 full years left on their contracts. And they had just extended Brock, 9 months earlier or so, at least the announcement was made, but it had happened earlier. So he began the 21 season with 3 years left on his deal. And Jamie Elizondo had a 3-year deal. And look, that was a weird season, right? No training camp, all kinds of guys that weren't in football shape. The product sucked, long-term decisions for your franchise off the 2021 season. But the Edmonton Elks board did. And they decided it was better to box themselves in financially for multiple seasons and get rid of Jamie Elizondo and Brock Sunderland. And as badly as they were boxed in, that was if they made the correct hire on, when they went out to get Chris Jones. And let's be honest, look, I'm a Chris Jones as a coach fan, no question. I think I'm really disappointed in what's happened in Edmonton, but I think you've got a guy who's the head coach, you got a guy who's the GM, you got a guy who's the DC, and who really doesn't have a football boss. And why was that situation allowed to develop? Well, because they needed somebody who could do 3 jobs, because they were so limited on what they had because of the operations cap, because they got rid of Elizondo and Sunderland. So, I understand when people get mad at the cap, and I understand when people say they need to look at it, and I believe they will this offseason, because it's not good for the league to bury a team, the way it has really, helped hinder the development of the Edmonton Elks and them getting out of this current situation. But there's got to be some responsibility for the Elks board that made a choice. And, I don't think it was the right one.
What I don't get is with this Victor, it seems like he was the hero of the world here for 2 years. And now it's like, oh, he was Heisenberg all along. Like, I'm getting people messaging me, oh, like he bought followers, or there was work, and people were feuding within the offices. Like, did this come out of the blue, or was this just kind of hidden in plain sight?
Well, I think, to be honest, and this happens all the time as a reporter, you hear things that you can't verify, you don't know if are true. And I mean, look, I'll speak for.
This is lovely. Let's get Dave back in here. Dave, driving here, covering, I think, Nathan Rourke's practice here. Let's see. Hopefully the reception here will pick back up. Was hoping for a more of a hotel here room with Dave, but we'll see. In terms of the week here tonight, you're going to the game, Jason, with Edmonton. What are you looking forward to tonight? Edmonton coming into Hamilton.
Well, I think it's interesting how the situation not really mirrors the season that was last year, but I think that it's kind of similar situations. Edmonton's looking for their first win. They got their first win last year at Hamilton, so I'm excited to see what happens in this one. Of course, Trey Ford started that game last year in Hamilton before the next week he gets injured. So I'm interested to see if Hamilton's better prepared this year. I think they will be, because they're coming off a bye week. Teams on bye weeks have looked very good this year. Even Edmonton last week came out firing with that 22-0 lead. So, I mean, it should be interesting to see how it plays out. I like Hamilton to win tonight, but I think that it should be interesting to see how those dynamics come into play with Trey Ford like he was a year ago.
Yeah, I'm interested to see here. Trey coming in, obviously had a spark last week in Edmonton. We chronicled all of that on the Monday show with the Winnipeg Blue Bombers and the 22-0 kind of collapse. But him coming in, the question is now if Hamilton, like, okay, now we got more tape. I mean, I know we had seen Trey before, obviously last year, but do you think Hamilton will be better prepared here than Winnipeg was defensively?
I think so. I think just based on the fact that they didn't see him this year and the player that he's improved to be this year, I think that that really caught the Winnipeg Blue Bombers off guard. I think that again, the bye week, they were able to make that coaching change to Jarius Jackson at offensive coordinator and implement a few new things that Winnipeg probably hadn't seen. So I think Hamilton should be better prepared in this one, but at the end of the day, you don't know, and Hamilton hasn't looked very good themselves this year, so we'll have to see how it plays out.
I think we got Dave back here. Dave, you were talking about you hearing things as a reporter and not being able to verify all of that with Edmonton. No,
I think I could. We're trying. There. Can you hear me now?
Yep.
Got me now? Okay.
Yep.
The kind of things that you would hear, and I'm going to put this in the most general way I can, is that some people in the Elks organization did not enjoy working for Victor Cui. That's a a dumbed down version of what I was hearing. And look, but I also asked somebody in the organization, what's the second line of this story, right? Victor Cui fired. Okay, what's the second line? And what he said was, and he did not have the ability to get people to follow him. He was not a natural leader that people wanted to line up and believe in him, and that ultimately that was the weakness they felt. So, that's a reasonable reason to get rid of somebody if they're the CEO of your organization. And It will always go with the asterisk that, yeah, but his team didn't win a home game the entire time he was president. I only had one extended conversation with Victor Cui. It was right when he got hired. We talked about his time in Asia and how we'd both been at the Commonwealth Games in 1998 in Kuala Lumpur, Malaysia. And I thought he was a really bright guy, and I thought it was a really neat kind of local hire, but outside of the box, right? He's an Edmonton guy, but he'd been doing sport entertainment in other parts of the world. I'm very disappointed it didn't work out, but the circumstances in which he was working were not easy. And you guys have been around football before. You both know, like, the stress level around everybody in a football organization when you don't win, and these guys have, not won like nobody else, right? It's just, it's really hard for everybody to kind of be happy and smiley and treat everybody well when just every week after week you're losing football games. And I'm not talking about Victor right now. I'm just talking about football people in general when you're on one of these roles.
But it's so weird that this all came out now. Like you said, people didn't like working for him. He wasn't. Where was all this last year when it was like, Victor on top of the world and he's turning all this around? I mean, there were stories were endless.
Yeah, I don't remember hearing any of those things, about the work environment a year ago. They were all this year things. And, I was looking at him and, hey, he's got a first-year coach who's, trying to identify some pieces and is going to use the rope that he's got to sacrifice wins for finding players for next year, right? That's what coaches do a lot of times in year number one. They use it as kind of one long training camp and play the long game. The problem is, if you do that, it better come together in year number two. But I thought, there were initiatives that he took, things that were creative. And even, I heard you guys talking about the guaranteed win thing. Yeah, I mean, in terms of finding a way to get people in the park, again, I didn't think it was the craziest idea. Didn't think they were going to lose 8 straight, not win a home game either. He certainly tried some things. But I can say that overall, talking to some people in that market and some people out of that market, there didn't seem to be a great degree of confidence in his ability to lead the Elks out of this current situation. And here's the other thing about it, okay? The Edmonton Elks, everyone in Edmonton screaming for change, right? The Edmonton Elks board, as it's structured, there's only one guy they were allowed to fire. They couldn't fire Chris Jones. Well, they couldn't probably because of the economics anyway. But even if they couldn't, that's not a board decision. That would have to come from the CEO. There's only one employee the Edmonton Elks had the ability to dismiss, and that's the guy they dismissed. And also, there's no economic, cap implications for them because presidents aren't part of the football operations cap. So both from a bookkeeping point of view and an actual, administrative point of view, that was the only move they could make.
Is this? It said mutually agreed, right? Mutually agreed. Was Victor pushed out?
Try me again on that one, Reed.
Was this truly mutually negotiated, or was Victor pushed out?
I believe that this was the board pushing out Victor Cui. I can't tell you. I haven't spoken to him, and I can't tell you whether he might be just as happy to have moved on or such. But in terms of where this initiated from, and I'll defer to my colleague Farhan Lalji, who did some of the on the closer to the ground kind of reporting on this story. He said as much on SportsCenter the other night that this was, although it was announced as a parting of the ways, this was the board making the decision to move on from Victor Cui. And, they've got now the chair is the interim CEO. And then, they're looking for somebody in the next 3 or 4 months, and that's going to be an important hire because that person could be in the thick of an ownership transformation, right? They're not going to get a big season ticket bump this offseason, right? And that's the lifeblood. That's the gas station for a CFL franchise. You go to the offseason, your bank accounts are low, bang. Season ticket money comes in, fills it up for you. That's not going to be flowing very well in Edmonton this year. And then, it has been pointed out to me, this isn't a one-year fix. If you look at where this franchise is, the Elks organization is probably going to be spending more money than they're taking in for multiple years. That means an investment. And when you look at where they are on the rainy day fund and their economics and look at the rate that they're burning through money, you can see this team's need to be recapitalized. And the question is it the board that's going to go out and issue a new class of shares and try to do it on the backs of the community ownership model? I mean, I can think of one problem with that off the top is, are people right now going to run out and buy those given the state of that franchise? I don't know. I can certainly see that might not be, and you can't threaten them. You can't say, oh, if you don't come and buy it, that's not a tactic. So, if you had, I'll just say, an Edmonton Amar Doman who's saying, well, I'll do this, I'll stroke the check, I'll invest this team, or, possibly 5 or 6 business people from the community who are each going to pony up, $2 or $3 million and say, we'll take this thing on. I think I will guarantee you this. Those alternatives that I'm talking about will be on the table for consideration this offseason. I can't tell you whether the team's going to go public or private, but I know there's been some public messaging that, we're fully committed to the private. That's not.
We lost Dave again.
Uh-oh.
Yeah, this is a little tricky today with Dave. Let's see if he pops back in here. Frozen again. I don't know, Jason, what do you make of all this here? We're hearing strife and, Victor getting pushed out and all of this. To me, we talked here a couple weeks ago on the podcast, really rock bottom for Edmonton here. Coming back now, I truly don't know where they can go from here.
Yeah, I mean, I've said multiple times on the recap shows, I'm at a loss of words to this point that it's gotten this far, and I thought that they'd be out of this mess by now, given that it's been 3 years since the canceled 2020 season and their struggles since 2021 began. And I think that at the end of the day, it's just really hard to see as a CFL fan. You never want to see one of the CFL teams, even if it's the Argos, from my perspective as a Ticats fan, go through this for an extended period of time. And I think it's not good for the league overall.
I was talking with Jim Mullen last night about this, and he was mentioning, obviously this isn't the first time with financial issues, and we've seen bankruptcy, right, with the Roughriders having telethons and the the Renegades, everything. Like here, having a struggling Edmonton team, just in terms of the historical context that they have in the league, what do you make of this?
Yeah, it's tough to see because this is the team, their franchise, that has been the historical attendance leader in the CFL. And just to see it consistently go down year after year, even before the pandemic, those 5 or so seasons before the pandemic, it's been on a downturn. And I think it's really just been accelerated over the past couple of years. And I think that what's disappointing from the Elks perspective is that in 2019, they weren't all that bad of a team. They actually got to the East Division final. They won a playoff game that year. And so I actually was pretty confident in them going into the 2021 season. So that's really a shocking part about it for me, and how they haven't turned it around still.
All right, let's give Dave one more shot here. Dave, you're talking about bringing in financial, maybe they go privately owned the end of the season. I mean, this is crazy talk.
Well, listen, one of the questions that I had when I started, getting the sense that this could happen or that this was moving in that direction was, what would the league have to say about that, right? Because the league is very traditional, and you could certainly imagine, a position where they would want to, defend the heritage and the tradition of community ownership in Edmonton that goes back so long. And I would just say my preliminary conversations at the league level on that, I do not believe the league would have any inclination to stand in the way of that team going private.
That's interesting. Jason, I know you have some questions for Dave while we have him on here.
Yeah, so thanks for doing this, Dave, first of all. My question is, what is your sense of the health of the CFL right now? We have some negative stories like the one in Edmonton, which we've gone in length about, but we also have some positive developments like increased TV ratings this year, slight uptick in attendance. What are your thoughts on the overall health of the league?
I think it, especially, I'm going to put it in the context of what we came through, with the pandemic and, transfers of ownership in both Montreal and BC. And it's not just changing owners. They changed owners of guys that had owned those teams for like 25 years, like Bob Wetnall in Montreal and David Braley in BC. You can argue what you thought of them as owners, and I think they both did things that were, good and not so good as in terms of the league. But they were bedrocks, right? And it's hard to change bedrocks. And now when you look at having, Amar Doman in BC and Pierre-Karl Pelado in Montreal, I think those are really good bridges to the future. And this is one of the things about, you know, the in terms of the security of the CFL. If you go around the Board of Governors table, the CFL right now, these are not people of, you know, marginal wealth that, you know, may have to take out a second mortgage on the home if the team doesn't win, you know, more than 6 games or something. I mean, these people are phenomenally wealthy. I mean, from Pierre-Carl Pelledo, you're talking about in billions. You know, I don't know Omar Doman's wealth, but again, I don't think he's having any concerns about absorbing, you know, losses for the BC line. Now, this is not a great business model, you know, to have a bunch of wealthy guys who just become philanthropists. Your teams only get value if you can make them profitable. But I think the fact is you've got people that have both the wherewithal and the ability to invest in their teams and not have to sort of have a short-term view of it. So, you know, again, when I look at how around the Board of Governors table, that makes me feel very good about the league. When I look at it on television, it's always been a strong television property. You guys mentioned the ratings this year. They've been very good. The games have been sort of better than we might have expected given some of the injuries to quarterbacks. And, you know, look, it's always been a league where, you know, I had a player ask me one time last year, a player who was in college who was, you know, possibly coming to the CFL. He's in the NFL right now. And he asked me how the league was doing. And I said, you know, it's really hard to answer that. Like, if you ask me how Winnipeg's doing, you know, you think you went to a game there, you think the league's thriving and, you know, never been better. And if you went into a game in Toronto, you know, you'd wonder how a market of 6 million people can't draw 15,000 to a game. So, you know, you've got some extremes, but look, in my time covering the league, and that's, you know, 3 decades plus, there have been times I have worried about the viability of this league, that I have worried about the extinction of this league. I don't really feel like that's anything that anybody's concerned about right now, or should be. And even as the Elks, right? Like, I've been very clear, the Elks are hitting a financial crisis, the first one I've ever seen in my career, and I've covered financial crises, at least one, for every single other franchise in this league. But they're not in danger of folding. They just got to be recapitalized, and that's going to happen, and it's going to take a while till they turn it around.
It's so weird. You talk about the Board of Governors, and it always seemed to me that, like Victor had all these ideas that they just like they weren't ready for, and he was coming in, and now it seems like that wasn't really maybe the case at all. It's so weird to kind of revamp my mind now around this whole situation.
Well, I agree, and I think one of the things, you know, is sometimes as a journalist you got to be really careful to know what you know and know what you don't know, right? And you know, I am not boots on the ground in Edmonton. You know, I don't have administrative sources inside that organization, you know, so the reporting on that stuff is very, very tricky. And, you know, there's been some mentions that, you know, there were some employees that went on stress leave and were not, you know, high up administrative employees. And when I poked around on that, you know, the reaction I got was, you know, those were very personal situations. And, you know, I'm not probing on those. You know, I'm less about what happened and more.
No, we get a little burst.
Right, the franchise. You know, he had been a scholarship. He'd been awarded a scholarship at the University of Alberta. You know, he was from Edmonton. He had international sport experience. It all just seemed to line up, and until it didn't, I guess.
Jason, you got another one for Dave while we have him on here?
Yeah, for sure. I'm going to ask about the Genius Sports partnership. And I mean, Randy Ambrosie really talked about it when they first came into the fold. And my question is, how would you grade the CFL's partnership with Genius Sports to this point?
Impossible. And look, you know, because the only thing that's really come to the surface is the stat service being a mess, right? Which, you know, feels indefensible given the priority and the importance of that aspect of the business, especially in the environment where we're in with sports betting. And frankly, you know, just as a journalist covering the league, it makes things really, really challenging. So, you know, that's the only thing that I and others really have to judge them by. I will say this, when this Genius Sports deal came in, and I think Genius Sports does have a pretty good reputation, you know, elsewhere. You know, the structure of it made some sense because it was like, hey, we couldn't afford these guys. We can't afford to be their clients. We couldn't pay what the NBA or the NCAA or the NFL pays, and they're all clients with Genius Sports. So we created this creative structure where they're equity partners in our league. We win, they win, and we don't have to outlay cash, and we're going to get the benefit of their expertise. I was also told this is going to take a while, before it comes to fruition, until the positive effects of this happen. And it was also, journalistically, it's been hard to explain what the heck Genius Sports is, because I don't really fundamentally understand it either, right? It's data mined from the CFL that can be used in the sports betting space, can be used in other ways to cultivate fans, based on what they're interested in. It can help highlight the players and the things that fans want more from the game. But I can't really break down for you how that works. So, I use the word off the top, impossible to evaluate. Yeah, I would go and say that, because I don't want to come in and just be negative on it. And then, in 2 years from now, once it's matured and the stat service works, and actually worked out pretty well. I don't want to judge the game at halftime, and I feel that's where they are. But I'm probably being, a little charitable on that, given all the frustration we all have at the knees of Genius Sports on the stat stuff.
No, I think you can always be critical as we go along. I mean, that's the XFL, USFL every day, and you got to hold them accountable. You want it to get better. In terms of our commissioner here, I'm hearing media tour next week and kind of talking midway through the season. What do you make of Commissioner Ambrosi here? Like Jason said, demos are up, ratings are up, a lot of other stuff.
Well, and again, good or bad, everything falls in the commissioner's scorecard, right? And I'll go back to what I said about the owners. Right, one really important job for commissioners is making sure that when there is a financial issue with a franchise, that the transition happens without it taking down the league in any way, shape, or form. And also you're measured by the quality of the owners you can bring into the league. I used to say, look, Tom Wright, when he was the commissioner of the league 20 years ago, very nice guy. I liked him very much, but he inherited a 19 league, gave back an 18 league, and had 3 teams go bankrupt, and had teams go bankrupt without other owners lined up ready to take them on. Right, the league took over the Hamilton Tiger Cats. The league took over the Toronto Argonauts. The Ottawa REDBLACKS folded. So and then I'll say that in Randy's case, the league did have to take over the Montreal Alouettes, but it wasn't really disruptive, right? There wasn't, every team had to write a big check. I'm sure they weren't very happy about it, but it was a pretty seamless process. And then you've got, Gary Stern, let's be honest, he was a placeholder, right? We know that. The league knew it the day they introduced him, but he held the place that they needed him to hold. He spent a ton of money, and he became the bridge to Pierre-Carl Pelado. And again, you got to give Amar Doman, you got to give that to Randy. That's on his watch. I think the fact they got a 7-year CBA is a win. I don't think it's good for business stability. If you're going into CBA negotiations, you got doubts about when your season's going to start, and the two sides bickering every 2 to 3 years, like we saw for a while. Those are all things that I would kind of give him check marks for. The expansion thing, he talks a lot about expansion, a lot, and I think even he knows, he does know, that the time has come where nobody wants to hear about expansion talk anymore. They want to see action. They want to see things happening. They want real, stake in the ground, dates on the calendar. This is when this is happening. So, I think that if he can't, because he's talked about expansion so much and the need for it, and I think they've got business consultants that are telling them they need to get to 10 teams because of what it'll do to the schedule. They want to move the Grey Cup up a couple weeks without having to move the season up. You can do that because you can get rid of 3, go from 3 bye weeks to 1. Just everything gets better balanced, right? With this ridiculous schedule where the Argonauts have had 3 bye weeks and then aren't going to have any of the rest. All kinds of things get ironed out if you get a 10th team. But if he can't produce a 10th team, that's going to kind of be on him, because he's the one who set the agenda to make it happen and say they need it and they want to have it. So, look, I think it's been an extremely challenging time. I've sat with Randy kind of annually at the Grey Cup every year and talked about, where he is on his to-do list and things. And, COVID was a, interruption of proportion no one could have imagined. I know he took a lot of criticism, especially on the front end of that. Overall, somehow the league got through it in pretty good shape. And, I'll acknowledge that in my evaluation of him as well.
When you talk about legacies of commissioners, I mean, that would be Randy's legacy. I mean, right now, demos being slightly up is not a, hey, in 20 years, you're going to look back and go, Randy got us through COVID. Maybe this genius, I mean, I think Randy, if he really cherished, I mean, there's a million reasons to want to have a 10th team, but I mean, that would cement you in that legacy as well, right?
Absolutely. It's. I mean, I always joke about this, Reed. Like
Oh no, we lost you, Dave. You're on mute or something now. He was joking. I was ready for his joke. Jason, we're fighting through today. Thank God Julio Rodriguez just hit a 3-run home run. We're up 5-4. I was very stressed. We've been hot today. We've been struggling with connection issues. The Mariners are losing to the Royals. So we're getting through it. Let's see if Dave can get back on again here. We're going to let you have the next question on here. But in terms of, we've talked about this, the 10th team. Do you like that? Move the Grey Cup up, get rid of the bye weeks without changing the schedule?
Oh, 100%. This is something that I've wanted for a while. Ever since the Red Blacks came back into the league, we've had to deal with this 9-team league and the reality of having one team off every week. I also hate the first and last week buys. Those are really the ones that drive me the most nuts, because you're getting ready for a season to start, but one of your fan bases in the league doesn't have a game to look forward to that week. So I think that has always driven me insane. And then I think the schedule this year is they're doing 3 games each of the last 2 weeks. So they're going to be 3 teams on bye the last 2 weeks of the season. So that's a little bit different. And I think that may be a better solution to it than what we've currently seen or what we've seen the past couple of years. But I think ultimately a 10th team would solve a lot.
Better or less worse. And what I was going to say there, just about, it's always the perspective on expansion, right? 1967, the year that I'm born, the Canadian Football League has 9 teams. The National Hockey League has 6. The CFL was 50% bigger than the NHL the year I was born. I have no other comment than that.
That's why I like the what we call the CFXFL or whatever. I like the North American Football League. All those talks we had, 2 years ago. Now I like that. I like the CFL XFL talks.
Well, look, I get a lot of heat from people now. As the guy who wanted to see the merger. Again, I'll just restate my position of that. I thought the league needed to explore that fully, given the circumstance of COVID, the uncertainty of ownership around like at least 2 teams at that time, if not more, and just the uncertainty of where the league was in general. I thought that the league needed to explore the XFL option fully, and ultimately they decided it didn't work, and whether that was the time of year, whether that was the rules of the game, whether that was, who was really going to control this entity. And I think it was more that than anything else. Like, I think it was all the control was going to rest in the hands of Redbird Capital and Dwayne Johnson and, maybe Maple Leaf Sports and Entertainment or something. But it wasn't, there was going to be a massive shift in power in decision-making under structure with the XFL merger. And I think there were a lot of people in the CFL were uncomfortable with that, and maybe rightly so. So ultimately, I think the league did the right thing, but I also think they did the right thing by exploring that rather than just sort of instantly turning their nose up at it.
Dave, I believe you're in Texas, right? Are you in Dallas right now, or are you in Jacksonville?
No, I am in halfway between Detroit and Athens, Ohio. I'm going from one Rourke to another. I was at the Jags-Lions practice today, where Nathan Rourke was practicing, and going to see his brother Curtis Rourke, who is on the Davey O'Brien watch list for outstanding quarterback in college football this season. And they open on July 26th. That's next Saturday against San Diego State, and we're going to their practice tomorrow morning at Athens.
Well, I take credit for America's wonderful nationwide infrastructure here of mobile data. This connection has been so tremendous today. What have you made of Nathan here? And Jack, we had the big, but Patrick Mahomes-esque and all this stuff. What have you made of Mr. Rourke?
Well, I mean, the play he made was spectacular. I mean, he broke 4 tackles. It was funny. I was talking to Mike McCoy, former CFL quarterback with Calgary, of course, who was the Jags quarterback coach, this morning at practice, and he told me something I hadn't heard about this. The game official told him that he twice nearly blew that play dead because he thought Nathan was going down. And it's it's preseason, right? So the officials are going to err on the side of blowing a play dead if they think it's going to get a quarterback snapped in half. And I thought that was really interesting. And I said this on SportsCenter, down on the field after the game. I said, I think I glanced away. I thought the play was over on one of those tackles, and I glanced away, and all of a sudden, boom, he pops up. And I mean, I had a bird's eye view on that play. My seat in the press box was right at the corner of the end zone when he threw it towards Kadri Allison, who I spoke to yesterday at practice. He had a funny description of the play, just slow motion, realizing that he'd thrown a dart to him on the fly after that kind of escape, and all he could think of is, don't drop this. He had the easy part. But and he said his family was, like Saturday night, his family was calling him saying, "You're famous, man." And this guy's been in the NFL for 5 years. But anyway, it was, no, look, and the only thing about the play, no negative on it, but it obscured, I think, the fact that Nathan Rourke, in his very first live NFL action, played a heck of a half. I mean, he had 153 yards passing and half a football. That's a 306 game full, After the first drive, he was 5 for 5 on third down conversions. And a lot of those third down conversions started at 1st and 20 or 1st and 15 because of the penalties that were taken on. The play that he threw the touchdown on was a 3rd and 16 play. So I thought it was very impressive. And just watching him, his sense of time and space, when to head up the field with his legs, when where to go with the ball. There was just no sense at all that you were watching a guy who never played in the NFL before. And like, that's Dave Naylor's eyes. And you guys know that's not my area of expertise in the business. I never played, I never coached. I'm a news guy, but I've watched lots of football. But, I spent some time on the phone the other night with David Sanchez, who has played a lot of football. And he studied every play from that half. And he came away with the same conclusion I did. So I think he's going to play a lot on Saturday. The Jacksonville beat guys tell me that they're not convinced that Trevor Lawrence is going to play at all. There's only 2 other quarterbacks on the roster. That's C.J. Beathard and Nathan Rourke. So as much as he didn't get a whole lot of opportunity in the 2 days of joint practices, I mean, quarterbacks don't get hit in joint practices. That's why Trevor Lawrence is out there taking most of the snaps. But I think Nathan Rourke's going to get a real good chance to play on Saturday again.
Is this something? Yeah. Is he have a chance to actually move up in the standing or in the, the depth chart? Because I know there was a lot of criticism when he chose Jacksonville over maybe other places.
Well, here's how it can happen. Okay. I think, and I was told this 6 months ago, that there's basically no chance that Nathan Rourke comes out of camp with the number 2 job. He's going to be number 3. So how does he move up? Well, it's going to take a Trevor Lawrence injury. Okay. Because if the Jags have their way, Trevor Lawrence will take every single snap for the Jacksonville Jaguars for the next 15 years, unless it's a game that they've clinched a playoff spot and they're holding them out. So he's not going to move up that way, or any other way, I don't think. And, you've got to understand, when you've got a Trevor Lawrence, teams aren't looking for him to be pushed or challenged, right? The number 2 quarterback's role, as much as anything, is to help Trevor prepare and be good. That's part of the role. And you need somebody who kind of embraces that role, as I think C.J. Beathard has with Jacksonville. This is when, Bo Levi Mitchell did his NFL tour 4 or 5 years ago when he was at his peak in his prime. And teams said, yeah, we'd like you to come in and help our starter, prepare to be great. And Bo was like, what? Like, that's not what I'm here for. Like, I'm not wired that way, right? No. And so that's why he ended up back in Calgary and turned down opportunities from Denver, Indianapolis, and the Vikings. So what could happen, this is how it could happen. Trevor Lawrence gets hurt, right? Month and a half injury. C.J. Beathard gets 2 or 3 starts. Looks kind of ordinary. Not very dynamic. Doesn't make a whole lot of wow plays. Okay? They lose 2 of those games. Okay? Let's put Nathan Rourke in. And if he goes in and plays well and does some magic, that's how he becomes number 2. And the more he can lay down on tape in these preseason games and demonstrate to his coaches and his general manager that he's capable of doing some special things on the field, the more likely he is to get the opportunity that I just described.
I don't think Justin Duck's head survives that weekend if Nathan Rourke comes in. I know Jason's got another question for you. I'm keeping you on here if you're driving. Connection's been so terrible. We'll keep you on while we can.
Yes. So, Dave, I'll ask you the same question I asked Farhan last week. What do you think, if you had to point to one thing, is the story of the CFL season to this point?
It's Chad Kelly, and I think that you put the content. First of all, what Chad Kelly's doing on the field is great on its own. If you're just watching him week to week, he's one of those guys that you turn on the TV because you want to see what he's going to do. But let's put some context around this, okay? Chad Kelly had played one football game in like 6.5 years before this season. And it was week 21 against the Montreal Alouettes last year with a bunch of backups on both sides of the ball. He hadn't played since his final game in 2016 at Ole Miss. So that in itself, I think, puts some, context around this. And then, he's playing for a team that has huge expectations. It's not like he can, get his feet wet and get acclimated to the CFL game. No, the expectations around him are this team is a Grey Cup repeat ready team. And the roster around him says it is. It's a real weird situation to have a team like this and a quarterback room with one guy who had one start and say, we can roll with this. And I'll throw one more thing in. And, I was reminded of this when all the publicity around Johnny Manziel recently, and I was thinking about his time in the CFL and this. And, most times when a guy has trouble keeping it on the rails off the field in the NFL, and that's the reason he comes to Canada, it doesn't work. Because if you can't keep it on the rails with millions of dollars at stake, it's unlikely you're going to be able to keep it on the rails with hundreds of thousands of dollars at stake. Okay? Thus far, Chad Kelly has been the ultimate outlier on that. Like, he did not keep it on the rails in college. He did not keep it on the rails in the NFL. That's why he's available to come to this league. And if you look at the tape of when he's drafted in the 7th round by Denver, the last pick of the draft, Mike Mayock, who's on the draft, says this is a 1st or 2nd round talent who is being taken here because of questions about his character and his ability to stay healthy with service in his final year of college. So that's why he's in this league. So I think when you look at the history of guys, who've had off-field trouble being able to keep it together in Canada, the lack of football that he's played, the environment that he's walked into and had to succeed with a lot of pressure to win right now, hands down, Chad Kelly is the story of the CFL thus far.
Well, and he had the tweet this week where it was like, everything happens for a reason, and I know I'm in my place. I mean, it seems like because that was my concern going into the season was I don't know if Chad Kelly wants to be a 3, 4, 5 year guy here, and you had your article at the beginning of the season, Chad Kelly is the most important player in the CFL right now. Are Chad and Kelly and the Argonauts, are they meeting or exceeding your expectations?
Well, I think they're absolutely exceeding them. Like this is a team that, other than one weirdo game in Calgary, and when teams have great seasons, there's always one of those games you just can't make any sense of. And losing Chad in that game on a night they weren't perfect, to say the least, they picked the wrong night. Because maybe if Chad plays that whole game, he can help bail them out of it. And, and instead, they lose him and they're doing a whole bunch of things wrong, all over the field. But, Chad sometimes, to his own detriment, when he talks to the media, he tends to tell you the truth about what he thinks about things. You remember the interviews he gave when he first signed, he was going to break all of Doug Flutie's records and stuff like that. But he did an interview with Pro Football Focus for an article about 3 weeks ago. And again, I'm going to assume Chad Kelly's telling the truth because that's kind of what he does, at least when he's talking to the media. And he was saying his attitude was essentially, I'm having the most fun in my life. I haven't enjoyed football like this for a long, long time. I love Toronto. I'd love to get back to the National Football League. But if that doesn't happen, I could see myself playing here for the next 10 years. And, sometimes playing in the CFL, I'm going to use a line that a writer used when he was writing. It was an American writer who wrote a piece about Anthony Calvillo when he set the all-time pro football passing yards mark. And it was that at some point in your career, you have to embrace compromise. And that means embrace being in the CFL. And I thought it's a great line, right? Like, there's not a guy in the CFL that wouldn't rather be playing in the National Football League if he could. But at some point, you got to know what you are and you embrace where you are. And Chad's talked a lot about, you look at some of the language, we know he's been, he's had some challenges in his life, right? And he's had some counseling and things like this. So you can hear it in some of the things he says, like, hey, you got to really stay present where your feet are standing, things like that, right? Don't think about what happened to you in the NFL and why you're not there anymore. Don't think about where you want to be in 3 years. Think about where you are right now, where your feet are right now, and live this moment. You can hear it in a lot of the things that he says. And to my appearance, he seems to be doing that. And if Chad Kelly decides, look, first of all, I don't know if he's going to have an opportunity to go back to the National Football League because he's 29 and he's going to be a magnet for attention if he goes back. And sometimes, teams would like their number 2 to be CJ Beathard, right? Who's never a magnet for attention. And this Doug Flutie faced the same kind of thing, when he was trying to go back. He either had to go back as a number 1 kind of or not at all because he's not wired to be a backup. I don't think Chad Kelly is wired to be a backup. If he can embrace this opportunity, he can have a great life and make a whole lot of money, 90 minutes from where he grew up. That's not a bad deal, living in a city like Toronto. I'd be ecstatic to see him be able to do that. I think it would be great for the Argonauts. I think it would be great for the CFL. I think it would be great for Chad Kelly. And look, let's be honest also, Toronto's a city that needs a bit of cachet, right? They need something to kind of excite them, sometimes more than just CFL personalities. And this guy just happens to be the nephew of the greatest player who's ever played across the lake in Buffalo. So there you go.
Ken had a comment here. Chad Kelly's probably the reason why Argos and Ottawa had 550,000 viewers last Sunday. Those are West Division numbers for an East versus East game. Also point out Trey Ford, right? His debut. That was the game of my life that night, and the roller coaster of my life with that. Let's let Jason get one more in here, and we'll start bringing this thing to bed.
Yeah, my question here is talking about quarterbacks here. So we've said for the last several years in the CFL that we're kind of in this stage of mediocre quarterback play. Even you look 10 years ago or even 5 years ago, you had guys like Bo Levi Mitchell, Mike Riley, go back further than that, Calvillo, Ricky Ray, all those guys. Are there any guys?
Dickinson's,
yeah, exactly. Are there any guys that you've seen this year with all the quarterback injuries that you believe have the opportunity to become one of those guys down the road? Because the CFL is definitely going to need them.
I would say Drew Brown jumps out to me as one. I was joking with another writer. Well, I'll say his name because he wouldn't mind. I don't think Jeff Hamilton of the Winnipeg Free Press that we got in an argument in the FRC suite last year at Grey Cup about which quarterback was more ready to take on a starting role in the CFL. I said Chad Kelly and he said Drew Brown. And I joked him the other day. I said, hey, we were both right, maybe. So Drew Brown, and I'm going to go by more even than just the way he's played. Listen to him when he's interviewed. And I know that game after interview, some of them are just bunk, right? They waste time. Guys just give you message tracks. But listen to Drew Brown. And I think you see there's something there, in terms of the way he's approaching the game, the way he's approaching being Zach's understudy, the way he approaches the opportunity. That also really jumped out at me. So I'm going to say Drew Brown is one. And again, I think Dustin Crum, I know we all got really hot on Dustin Crum when he engineered the comeback over Winnipeg. And then all of a sudden it's really cooled off a bit because teams have taken away his ability to just turn up field, and he's not as much of a dual threat quarterback as he was early on and stuff. But geez, can we remember this guy's played like 4 games? Never mind the opposition not really knowing him that well. His own team doesn't know him that well. And I think we have to put what he's doing into the context of what's he going to be like at the end of his second season? Because that's really when we judge, is this guy going to be somebody that's going to have a long future in the CFL? We always talk about that 2 to 3 year range. That's why so many people were bullish on Taylor Cornelius coming into this year, because it's like, okay, he was better in year 2 than year 1. Now this is year 3. Here's where it clicks. Boom. Didn't happen. But I would definitely say that Dustin Crum is, and again, guy's got some pedigree, right? MAC Player of the Year. So and I think there's a mental makeup that you hear his teammates talk about as well that I think suggests that there could be something there as well. So those would be the 2 guys that aren't starters in the league. Crum is kind of by default because of what's happened in Ottawa, but I would not be surprised if by 2025 both those guys are starting quarterbacks in the league and very successful.
Yeah, Benjamin has a comment. Where would be a good landing spot for Drew Brown after he becomes a free agent in the offseason? I mean, I think Winnipeg pays him up and keeps him there, but I want to, you can comment on that, but I want your real-time kind of reaction to that fiasco last Thursday. The Ford, Ford comes in, he looks everything we thought he would. Drew, Zach goes down. What would you think about Drew Brown after the season? Then what was your thoughts on the game before you get out of here?
Well, you know what the game reminded me of? You ever turn on one of those college games on a Saturday and it's a total mismatch? Like outrageous mismatch, right? 23.5 point spread or something. And the team that's the underdog makes some like spectacularly wacky plays, and all of a sudden they're up 17-0 after a quarter. And the most important thing in the game from that point on becomes the clock. Because it's not if the other team's coming back, it's when and how much can they get done before the game is over. That's what I felt like watching that game. I said, these guys are coming back. Now, I got to be honest. When the Kyron Moore play happened, I don't know what Winnipeg was doing defensively, playing like cover zero and blitzing 9 guys on 1st and 10 at the 35. I mean, honestly, at this stage of his career, the best defense against Trey Ford probably isn't to sack him. It's probably to make him throw. But, you know, they put themselves on an island in coverage and the guy goes 70 yards. At that point, I thought, you know what? This is just one of those games. Like that game where Caleb Evans in Ottawa beat Edmonton before they were horrible. And, you know, it was Caleb's first start. I think it was his first play time. And they won the game. And it was just a bunch of wacky plays happened. Lapo called a flea flicker early on. Then Greg Ellingson fumbled on the next series. And you go, this is just one of those days. When the Kyron Moore play, I thought that. But, you know, again, we weren't counting on Drew Brown being as good as he was. Where would Drew Brown go after this season? Look, I don't think Winnipeg's going to be able to keep him because they're paying Zach almost $600,000 a season. And, you know, they got a roster that they're going to already have to make a whole bunch of hard choices on. You know, if they want to stay in a Grey Cup window and keep that roster together enough that that's what they are, I don't think you can ever have a backup quarterback on that team making, you know, 220 or something like that. I don't see how that could happen. So, you know, I think the market is going to find him. And wow, let me just think about it. Okay, who's going to need a quarterback next year? Saskatchewan, perhaps. Although, you know, Trevor Harris at 37 is, still a very capable quarterback, but it's also makes a big ticket, right? They could have a choice. Would you rather have, you know, Drew Brown at 300 than Trevor Harris at 5? You have certainly Ottawa. I would say, you know, if they wanted to go out, and I'm just making this up, but if they wanted to move on from Jeremiah Masoli and decide that they wanted to go with, you know, Dustin Crum and Drew Brown and pay Drew Brown, you know, 300 and bring Dustin Crum in to compete with him as the number 2. And Dustin Crum probably needs a year as the number 2, frankly. You know, I don't think anybody thinks that he's necessarily going to be their number 1 going in next year. So those would be a couple of plays. And I would say Hamilton as well, because we have no idea what Bo Levi Mitchell is going to be by opening day next year, right? With the injuries thus far, the performance thus far, it's really, really hard to predict. So, hey, there's a reason Bo Levi Mitchell got benched and then got a raise. There's a reason Trevor Harris went from making like $110,000 to making $500. It's because the market is really, really good and really, really desperate for competent quarterback play. And if Drew Brown steps into that market this offseason, I think he's going to have lots of opportunities.
Jason, I'll give you the last one to Dave, and we'll let him drop off here.
Yeah, just trying to see what else I haven't asked here. I want to ask about Hamilton specifically and the change at offensive coordinator to Scott Milanovich. Do you see the Ticats getting some kind of bump from that, or do you think that more changes are needed down the road here?
It's awfully hard because, you know, the personnel is still Taylor Powell. And, you know, with due respect, you know, he's a rookie out of the Mid-American Conference. And you know, I think you could see already it's very limited, you know, with what they're asking him to do. And I don't know that a different play caller asking him to do things that he's not ready to do is going to be the answer. But, you know, it's a tough one because, you know, Tommy Condell, I don't know. I'm led to believe that his firing had nothing to do with the situation where Bo Levi Mitchell got hurt. I guess I'll believe that, but it wouldn't surprise me if it did, because, you know, he's the play caller on that one, right? And if whether Bo did that on his own or, you know, you could certainly make the argument that it's his job to make sure Bo's out of harm's way on that play. You know, that said, it's a short yardage sneak. It happens all the time. Quarterbacks don't get hurt on that kind of play. I just know that there are probably a lot of people really frustrated in that organization with what happened, given the stage of game that it happened at. And again, there's never really been a, you know, whose fault was it resolution, but, you know, Tommy was the guy on the headset that night. So, Look, Scott Milanovich, the one thing you can't argue with, and Tommy Gondel has got a really good resume, as a quarterback, as an offensive coordinator, but Scott's won a Grey Cup as a head coach. Scott's been on the offensive staff of a couple of NFL teams. So, and I remember talking to Scott at training camp about, when you come back to the CFL, do you think you've evolved as a play caller? Are there elements that you have because you've been calling, or you've been some? I believe he's done doing some. I don't believe he called plays in the NFL. I think he had an opportunity last year when they fired Marcus Brady in Indianapolis, and I believe he declined it, if I have that correct. But he's certainly working with quarterbacks and putting together game plans and things that he could certainly bring back with him to the CFL. But again, I think it's going to be really limited just because of the personnel and the situation. But hey, he's a guy who's had a lot of success in this league. He's had some success with some underling quarterbacks. I mean, Logan Kilger, who is now a quarterback coach somewhere in the NFL. I can't remember where he is. He was a guy who got an opportunity, behind Ricky Ray when Scott Milanovich was his coach, and they had some success. So, I'm not. But to answer your question directly, no, I'm not expecting, a huge bump. Especially right out of the gate these first few weeks.
Well, Dave, thanks for fighting through the connection today. Drive safe. I appreciate it, and it'll be good. We'll talk soon, and we'll see you up here in Hamilton. We're having the whole crew's coming up here in November, so.
Looking forward to it, man. No, we had some really heavy cloud and lousy weather earlier, so I think that was kind of what screwed up our call. We're now still under cloud, but it's much higher. So thanks for having me on, guys. Appreciate it.
Thanks, Dave.
Appreciate it. Thanks.
See ya.
Well, we did it. The Mariners won 6-4. I was very stressed there. It was at the height of Dave's connection issues. The Mariners were down. Julio came back to run home run. Cal Raleigh kind of got one. So 6-4. Won the game. Jason, I want to spend I know you're getting to the game as well here for the Hamilton. I want to spend like 1 minute apiece on each of these games before we get out. Did you enjoy Dave's chat?
Oh, yeah. Dave is always just a great listen. Honestly, just hearing him answer every question, it's way better than what we can do.
Well, that's good. Yeah. So if anyone that found the connections, that was good. We finally got into that because, that's always like, I'll just call in. Like, I'm just on the phone. It's like for whatever reason, and cell phones and trying to do the video and all of that. I think on Zoom, I think you can just do an audio call. I think maybe if we could have pre-produced it and Dave could have done like an audio call in. But yeah, we got it. We appreciate it, Dave. Thanks for fighting through. You're going to the game tonight. Do you expect Hamilton to take care of business?
I think so, but I didn't have much confidence in it. I think that, like I said, I picked Hamilton to win on my channel, but I think that there is a part of me that says maybe history repeats itself from what we saw last year. One thing I want to point out in this game is that both teams are getting two key players back, or one key player aside, that is. Dylan Wynn is making his season debut for the Hamilton Ticats in the middle of that defensive tackle. Really key guy for them. And Eugene Lewis is actually going to be back in the lineup for the Edmonton Elks, so we'll see if that helps Trey Ford out in this one.
You said you're going to the Hamilton, and what's the other game you're going to be at?
I'm going to be in Ottawa for Montreal at Ottawa on Saturday night.
Oh, they're good. So I was like, Toronto's not playing this week. So Winnipeg at Calgary. Calgary looked bad again last week, right? Coming back. BC really kind of trouncing them. Any hope here? Do you think Winnipeg rolls through?
Well, I mean, Winnipeg has generally dominated Calgary in recent memory. They've played some great games, but Winnipeg always seems to come out on the winning end of things. But my question is, can Calgary take advantage of another backup quarterback playing in this one? Drew Brown reportedly getting the start in this one. So I think that the Stampeders obviously had the luck of playing Chad Kelly's backup a couple of weeks ago. Can they take advantage of another situation like that in this one? We'll see.
I will say, I think it was Monday after we got off, and Darren Bombing was doing a report on Twitter, and Zach's not here today, or Zach's on the field, but not, he's not dressed or whatever. And I really kind of live and die by a lot of this stuff. And I was like, oh man, like Caleros is out like that, where if you had told me 5 years ago, like I'm sitting here watching Darren Bombing's, Twitter reports, you're talking about the starting quarterback for the Winnipeg Blue Bombers. This is an interesting matchup. Montreal really hot coming in. We've talked a lot, Dustin Crum. I don't know. I feel like Montreal with the edge here, it feels like they're picking up a lot of steam. What do you make?
Well, I took Ottawa in a very close game on my channel, but didn't really feel too strongly one way or the other. Montreal, of course, has been the better team this year, and their only 3 losses are against the big 3 teams in the CFL, so that's worth noting. But I think that Ottawa just kind of has a little bit of magic about them at times this year. Maybe we see that in this one. I think that one thing I'm looking for is, does Montreal exploit that big weakness that Ottawa has in the secondary. Been giving up a ton of big plays over the last several weeks. So we'll see if whoever's at quarterback, whether that be Caleb Evans or Cody Fajardo, can they exploit that this week?
And then to me, this is a sure lock. I don't know what the betting odds are, but BC has to be heavily favored even in coming into Mosaic, right?
Yeah, I think I saw it was a 10-point spread, which is crazy for a road team in the CFL. I think that, like you, I think that BC is going to take care of business here. Really can't see Saskatchewan moving the ball on offense against BC's defense in any efficient way with Jake Dolegala at quarterback. And I think this is a chance for BC to really run up the score again. One thing I'm looking for in them is if Lucky Whitehead has a big game in this one. He's had a very quiet season to this point, so a lot of people kind of writing him off. So we'll see if he can have a big game against the Roughriders.
Oh, see, I like that with Lucky. I like him. Like, he's happy to play and do. I mean, we've talked about this before. I like that BC's wide receivers are happy to be a cast of characters. I do. I think that he has been quiet, but like, he stepped up when he's needed. He's gotten clutch passes when he needs. Keon, it was kind of Keon's night last week. And I like that they can kind of all take turns of that, where it feels more. I mean, I couldn't even see who's the receiving leader right now for the BC Lions. Like, I don't know. I mean, I would guess maybe Keon, but he's missed games. Dom's missed games. I mean, they've all kind of been in and out, right?
Yeah, I agree. I mean, it's just a great group. And I think that they have different skill sets as well. I think that if some of these guys were on other teams in the league, I think you could count like 4 or 5 of them that could be number 1 receivers on other teams, but they mesh together to make one hell of a receiving core in BC.
Well, that'll do it today. Like I said, thanks everyone sticking through. I thought Dave was good once we got all that figured out. It should be a more traditional show, I think, next week, trying to get back on the horse here. I think Greg Parks is going to come on. We're going to talk XFL, USFL, kind of how the players are doing here in the preseason. Supposedly, Ambrosie's doing a media tour. I've kind of got my name earmarked for that, so maybe we can have the commissioner back on. And then I had something else I was working on as well, so it should be exciting. Some players coming on, and then have some spokes in the fire here coming up, kind of balancing bye weeks with all of these teams. Jason, we'll be back on Monday. You have your preview on your channel. If people want to check that out as well. Anything else from you before we get out of here?
No, I think we've covered pretty much everything this week, and let's get out of here.
I'm sweating through here. It's hot. I was very stressed with everything, but we got it going. Appreciate it, Jason. Steady as a rock as always. Evan will be back on Monday as well. Evan's just road tripping right now. Just I couldn't imagine having 2 people on the phones calling in. So we had the one. We got it. Thanks everyone. Thumbs up the video if you can. We'll see you next time. Thanks.